Hello. Today we're going to be starting to talk about the book of Esther. It's an interesting book in the Bible, and we're going to be in it talking about the characters over several weeks because it's one of those books that has a couple unusual things about it. First of all, it never uses the name of God in the book, and yet it's very obvious that God is very much involved with the people that he loves and he's working with. The other thing that's interesting about it is it's only one of two books in the Bible that is named after a woman, Esther, who will come actually into our story starting next week. Now, the first thing I need to tell you is a little bit of background about Esther and the fact that before Christmas we were talking about the book of Daniel and how Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken by King Nebuchadnezzar into captivity in Babylon. And that's where they were, and all those stories happened there. And then one of the last stories we talked about was, or in a part of it, was that after King Nebuchadnezzar, his son made some poor choices, and because of that, a new kingdom came in and took over the Babylonian kingdom. And that kingdom was called the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. It was two groups of people who banded together and combined their kingdom so that they could have more power. And it was considered to be the most powerful kingdom on the world while it was here. Now, during the time of the Medes and the Persians, that was when, we've mentioned, the children of Israel, because they had not followed God, had been taken into captivity and were made slaves. Now, something very interesting that happened during that time is just like they had helped to build the pyramids in Egypt when they were in captivity years and years ago, when we talked about Moses and all those stories, while they were in captivity in Babylon, they helped to build another wonder of the world, of the ancient world, called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And so they were there and they had helped do this. And with that garden, that was a place of great splendor and of great celebration. And so our story starts in Esther with a king by the name of King Xerxes. Now, Xerxes is spelled with an X, which sounds like a Z, but it still said Xerxes. Now, Xerxes was feeling pretty good about himself, and this was at the end of the time that the children of Israel had been in Babylon. So we're not exactly sure when this happened, but we know that they'd been there long enough to have made an impact on what had happened. And you'll see that as we go along in our story. So King Xerxes was feeling pretty good about himself, and he decided to have all of the wonderful things he had on display for everybody. So for 6 months, he opened up his treasures so that people could see how rich and powerful he was. At the end of that 6 months, he then had a party. And during that party, he had one group over in one side for all the guys to come to, and then there was another party going on for all the women with his queen, whose name was Queen Vashti. And so the king was having his party and the queen was having her party, and after 7 days of pretty heavy partying, the king said that he wanted Queen Vashti to come so that everybody could see, all the men in the kingdom could see how beautiful she was. Well, Queen Vashti was a little smarter than you might think, because she was going, I don't want to go in a room with a bunch of drunken men just to parade around and let them see that I'm beautiful. It's like, I'm not having anything to do with that. So she basically respectfully reclined and said, I don't think that I need to do that. Well, the king was furious because she refused to let him show her off to everybody. So he went to his noblemen and said, what should I do? And they said, if the queen can tell her husband no and doesn't have to be obedient to her husband, what will happen to all the other all the other people in the kingdom, all the other men and all of those, if their wives decide that they don't want to be obedient? We have to have a very severe penalty. And so what they said, you need to make a decree in the laws of the Medes and the Persians that says that she will be banished and that she has to leave. She will no longer be queen and she has to leave the country. Well, the thing that was very interesting about the law of the Medes and the Persian is that once a king put a law into effect, it could not be undone. We talked about this a little bit back when Daniel and the lion's den, but if you said it was going to happen, it had to happen. There were no do-overs in Babylonian law. So the king was so angry, he signed the edict and said that he would no longer have Vashti as his queen, and he would make an example of her. But as you can guess, there's more to this story and what happens after he decides that, being a king without a queen is not the best thing in the world. So we'll talk about that next week. So to get you started with our story of Esther, what I would like you to do too, please, is in your kit you have a little baggie that has different pieces. And those pieces all go together to turn the spoon that's in there into a puppet. You can just slide this piece of material up because we know that his garden was decorated with blue and white, so I gave you blue shiny material. If you take the little piece of gold, you can take that off and put that on his head, and then you can attach a little bit of the yarn to the back of that, so he's got some hair. I gave you some eyes, and then I also gave you a glue dot so he could have a mustache if you want. So what you get to do is to make your own puppet of Queen Xerxes, because he's still part of our story, and we'll continue more with him next week. And because he's a king, I gave you what I typically give for kings and jewels. So I gave you some fruit snacks so that way you can eat and remember that he had all of his riches, but unfortunately he's missed the mark and hasn't quite figured out that the most important riches of all is to have God in his life. We'll be working more with him as the weeks go on.